Thank you very much indeed, and welcome everybody here and online. So yes, my role, my day job is as a telecoms analyst. So I look at the future of the whole telecom industry, the way the telcos behave, the suppliers interact, and of course all the pressures on that industry from different spheres, whether that's from the hyperscalers, from application developers, from governments, from regulation. But also being blind, I've also been using a lot of accessible technology over the last 25, 30 years to help me do that. So to consume all the content that the industry produces, to try and understand it, to come up with an understanding, hopefully a balanced understanding of the way the industry works. As I say to my children, I read through my ears. So I have got, with my earpiece in today, that's so I can, if I need to, I can find my notes about the interview that we're going to, or the chat that we're going to have now. But it's really, and it's also got my timer in there, just in case we run over. So yes, as you said, we're going to talk. Christopher, welcome first of all.
Thank you very much.
And Christopher actually has just moved to the UK, was based in California, took up this. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your role within Google?
Yeah, so my title is Head of Accessibility and Disability Inclusion for EMEA. That means I'm responsible for making sure that all of our products are accessible and that Google is a place where people with disabilities can thrive to work. And this is, I've come here, I've started this team in the UK to take an EMEA view, to take a disability view across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, and bring that inside to Google so we can understand how our technology needs to evolve from a product perspective, but also how our technology needs to evolve from a platform perspective, because you can't expect technology invented by people that look like me in California to really meet the needs of people with disabilities, say, in Kinshasa. So we want to work with the technologists, we work with the community to understand how we make our technology more relevant and resonant for them.
So do you know what's amazing is it's quite difficult to hear you, even though you're there, with the booming sound coming around on the microphones. Anyway, we'll find a way through it. So the reason for this subject, and thank you for the reference to the report. So I started looking at this topic of people with disability, probably early teens, so probably 2014, 2015. And trying to get an understanding at that time about just the dimensions and how important an issue it is. Because, of course, as a blind person, I'm very interested in it for my own sake. But I had no feeling for how hearing impaired or learning impaired or physically impaired people could use whether it's services or technology or whatever. So I put it into context. And then the report that we did with the MEF this year really looked at that again to try and put it in framework. So just for people's interest, and the reason that it is important for this discussion, for the Omnichannel discussion, is that it's about 1 billion people in the world, and in fact many would argue it's more than 1 billion people, who have some form of disability or impairment, and it's acknowledged as an impairment. So it's not a little bit hard of hearing or poor eyesight. It's when it becomes an issue, being able to do your daily life or your work. And just to break it down into context, the largest category in that is hearing impaired, which of the 1 billion people, it's about 380 million. And by the way, the statistics around this are always disputed. Everyone can always find different statistics. So I settled on this figure, having looked at all the different sources I could get access to. Vision impaired is the second highest at about 280, and then it drops down to physical and cognitive. But of course, the problem with the cognitive and learning impaired is that it's such a diverse range. And therefore, we haven't got a good handle on it. But if you think about that 1 billion people, that represents 1 in 7, roughly, of the population, the global population. It is the economic power, the economic spending power of that is roughly 4 trillion. So it doesn't matter, it's a massive amount. And of course, they are part of society, whether they are needing help in terms of not being able to support themselves at a very extreme end of the spectrum, but then also allowing people to become part of the digital society at the other end, where the technology is there, and therefore wanting to benefit from any number of services. You know, online shopping, of course, during lockdown has been a major issue, has been cut off to some people. So the discussion around Omnichannel is really about how do channels to market, how can they be streamlined, how can the ways people access the technology, the devices they use, the services they use, how can they be better prepared so everybody, with it, whatever the impairment is, can get access to it. And I think one of the important things to remember in this is that the billion people, there is an age profile. So I, for example, my vision impairment started when I was 6 years old and got worse and worse and worse to where it is now. But many elderly people begin to, I'm not sure, do we acquire impairments? I'm not sure acquire is the right word, but
Earn them.
but it does get worse over time. So there is also a very close correlation between the disability market and the grey or silver market in terms of people getting access to service, and especially of those because they're a good acid test because they've never had the digital skills, or they haven't had to. They've not grown up with them in the way that the young people are today. So Christopher, perhaps from your point of view, and thinking about Google as a whole, this accessibility and your work on people with disability, do you want to just frame that a bit more for us?
What we try to do is start the conversation with the user. We don't expect the users to have to adjust themselves to be able to use our products because the friction is too much. You can't expect people to if they want to do something, they want to do it now. So we as a service provider want to make sure we make it as easy as possible to do what they need to do. So we focus on the needs of the user and what we call the critical user journey of the user. Our mission statement is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. And if we truly want to be true to our mission, we have to really take the broad perspective of humanity in mind. Google search is rather popular. People use it a lot. And if we can't provide the information in the way that they want to take it, they're not going to use it. So we do what we can by collaborating with the communities we want to serve, the disabled community, but it's also a larger language of inclusion because language evolves, culture evolves, and we need to make sure that we stay relevant and the information we have stays relevant to them. So it started with the web, and then it goes to mobile, and looking into the future, we have virtual reality and augmented reality. If we want to play in these spaces and have information that's relevant for the people, you have to talk to them. You have to work with them. You have to have the intent to serve them. Because you can't make it easy for you, you have to make it easy for them, and then they're going to come back.
While listening to you there, it reminds me that the way, perhaps a little description of how I interact with the, whatever it is, metaverse or whatever, that my predominant means of interaction now is through my smartphone, with an earpiece, and then you probably can't see, with a tiny keyboard, so my phone never comes out of my pocket, so I'm continually interacting, typing, receiving information on that. But in the home, I'm using smart speakers. I'm talking to it all the time. In fact, one unusual use of the smart speaker you may not have thought of, but because I don't see words written down, if I can't spell something, I ask that A word how to spell it. It's a brilliant service. It just works. So it's adapting around me in terms of, in the old days I could magnify things on a screen. So someone just tweeted, so the tweet's now reading out in my ear, so I don't want to hear that. But the point is that I'm beginning to immerse myself in all of the technology. My primary means is a smartphone. It's an Apple one, not a Google one, but we'll come onto that in a second. And then the smart speaker, and then a regular laptop. And the interesting thing is the technology to allow me to use the screen, so screen reader technology, is built into the iPhone device, as it's built into Google devices, but it's a third-party piece of software onto the laptop. So by definition, it can't keep pace with all the changes. So, but that interaction becomes incredibly important. So when people say, go to this website, go to that, it's not such a simple statement for someone who can't see or who has motor skills to be able to get access to them. So when we think, what I'd like everyone to think about today, and this is an early takeaway, is in your business or your customer's business, any touch point that you have with your customer base, to Christopher's point about what the intent is, what you're trying to do for that customer, any touch point, think about how accessible that is for that range of disabilities that we've just touched upon. Think of what design, and we'll come into inclusive design, but what the way you design the processes within your business, the assumptions you make about your customers and your customers' customers are really, really important. Because as a technology industry, we do get very carried away, and I often describe this as being an inside-out. Telecoms has been an inside-out model where we design technology within our laboratories, and we eventually expose it and say people, you should be very happy, we've got a new broadband or a new video or whatever service. But actually, that's not really addressing what the people, to your point about the intent, what people are trying to do with it. So think about, people, especially with the age profile and the disability profile, how would people prefer to get in contact with their telecom provider, their utility provider, their government organization? And because we're trying to automate and save money and make things more efficient, we're trying to push people towards those more digital channels. Whereas in fact, the complementarity between digital and physical, or audible in this case, is really, really important. So Christopher, just tell us a little bit about some of the, the moves you've made on the device side and that accessibility. And you just put out a new Pixar phone, I believe, which you might want to touch upon.
Considering where we are, I want to sort of share an example of what we did inside Google first about how to help our customers. The only free support channel for all Google products is for people with disabilities. And we did this because we realized that the channels we had didn't meet the needs. So we created a dedicated service to support all people with disabilities. It's here in Europe, it's there, and it's available in the US as well. And we set up the channels with the chat, the email, the phone support, and then we realized that we were missing something. We weren't meeting people where they were. So we added Be My Eyes support. So for people who are blind, they use a really wonderful application called Be My Eyes, and we have a dedicated secure channel of people who are under NDA, and they will take a look, and they will use their phone to show their Nest Hub or their laptop that's having a problem, and the person can see and work with them and help them solve the problem. And this has become one of our most popular channels. Another thing we did is add sign language support for the service, because sign language is often a person's first language. English, French, whatever would be a secondary language for people who are deaf. So meeting them where they are, understanding how to speak to them in their language, literally and figuratively, is really, really important if the goal is truly to serve them. Now, taking a look at it from a technology perspective, iPhone has the benefit of having the first screen reader for mobile devices. It's an excellent piece of work. It's been around for over 10 years. Android added ours later, and the latest versions of Android are, I'm not here to sell anything, but I want to sort of share how things go. It takes time to build expertise. It takes time to build a product that really meets the need of people. You have to collaborate with the community to understand the needs. You have to build the technology, and these things evolve over time. So now I'd say the Android phone is as good or almost as good as an iOS device for people who are blind. But where we lean in terms of our technology, where we're really good is machine learning and artificial intelligence, and where we've really done excellent work is around supporting the people who are deaf or hard of hearing. We have amazing captioning technology in Google Meet. We have it in the Chrome browser. In English, you can get captions for any audio that's happening on your computer. On your mobile phone, you can provide captions for any audio that you have. It's English today. It'll be more languages in the future. But this provides contextual awareness of what's happening. Someone can send you a video that they just took, and you can hear what's said. More impactfully is this now can work for phone calls. So now someone who is deaf who can speak can actually have a conversation with someone on the phone. A friend of mine, we became friends over the technology. He actually had a phone call with his son in Hong Kong for the first time in his life at 53 because of this technology. So learning to meet people where they are and doing what you're good at gives an opportunity to provide really powerful, impactful technologies and solutions.
I must tell you my favorite Be My Eye story, which I was in a hotel in China, in Shenzhen, and I could not control the air conditioning. And I tried to get someone from the hotel to help me. They couldn't understand me. I couldn't understand them. Got Be My Eyes, pointed my phone at the thermostat on the wall. Somebody in the US picked up the free call to me, looked at the control, told me which buttons to press, and within 30 seconds the aircon was set. That, for me, that is mind-blowing, the technology at our disposal, the camera, and if I often talk about the camera being a proxy for eyes and the microphone being a proxy for ears, and the power of the phone and the cloud being a proxy for the brain, access to all that help. So once again, wrapping that service around and helping people. But you touched upon a really important point there, Christopher, which is that these things are all available. And in fact, your translation issue is, I did my degree in computational linguistics a long time ago, so I'm delighted that is now available and helps get through that barrier. Mm-hmm. But the ability to bring together, captioning, audio description to help with content. The number of times I attend webinars on the telecom topic and the videos have no audible content at all. It's, I therefore just switch off and go and do email, so because there's no content for me. So to start to capture that, to caption it, is really important. In fact, and when we did the event in July with the MEF, we had a live captioning service, an incredible service called SyncWords, who use court reporters to actually capture in physically real time. Now, of course, the compute power is catching up with that and is getting better and better. But we're beginning to have all of these things that begin to match some of the requirements for people with different disabilities. And with your intent comment, then yes, we need to wrap it together. But when we design it, and we think about the approach to it, there are three phrases that come to mind. There's a guy called Larry Goldberg who joined us for the webinar when we did that in July. And he talked about shift left, born accessible, and no regression. And I think you're thinking at Google very much fits in with that. Do you want to comment on Larry's three premises, or any two out of three?
I think each of them are important. The concept of born accessible really, for me, means the expectation is that everything you do was designed for the broadest possible user. Ramagirawo, he's the director at the Helen Hamlin Center here with the RA, says if you design for the edges, you get the center for free. So what this means, if you design something for a broad audience, your standard middle-aged white male is probably going to have a fine experience. But if you only design for that middle-aged person that looks like me, the people who don't look like me, who aren't built like me, who don't have the senses that I do, are going to have a harder time. There's one thing I want to say, if I can give you my one takeaway here. Disability is an odd word. There's people who have impairments, and they have impairments, but there's no disability until something is designed without them in mind, which means someone who is blind has a great world until they can survive in the world until they hit something that was not designed for them in mind. Someone who is deaf in a deaf environment can communicate just fine. They have sign language and talk to each other. It's not a problem until they reach a piece of content, or they need to talk to someone who doesn't speak in their language. So it's not the disability that's the problem. It's the mismatch of expectations of a person who has a disability and what the culture around them, the society around them, expects of them.
And certainly, the no regression bit for me is probably the most important, because, as you've described, we've got the building blocks there to provide a level of accessibility. It's not perfect. People don't necessarily label everything. But what I have found is that certainly on mobile devices, the labeling of buttons, let's say, is very sporadic. But then when people do get it right, they then go through another iteration of the app, and suddenly it's not accessible anymore. And there is a well-known airline based here in the UK, who I've used for many years traveling around the world, who had a brilliantly accessible app, and then a new version came out and suddenly was almost not usable. And that's that no regression bit. It's not having it built into the DNA to keep working through and delivering. And I think, just to tie it back into a lot of the other discussions within the conference, the ability to jump between channels is really important. In doing the original research, I was talking to someone with cerebral palsy via a chat message. And I said at some point, shall we move to voice, or shall we have a phone call? He said, well, we can try. Actually, we couldn't communicate at all. So voice was completely cut off. But we then went back to using SMS, to using, at that time, Skype, which tells you how long ago it was, and then also using email. So you can have a perfectly rich interaction. But the issue has to be that in terms of that, dealing with the customer, that customer experience, you've got to be able to jump between those channels easily and effectively, transparently, to make sure that service gets delivered properly. And if you need to have some sort of specialist service wrapped around it, as you mentioned with Be My Eyes, then the ability to jump to a person who might better understand the individual and at least be a, work with them understanding of vision impairment or hearing or whatever, that at least there's a specialist group in there as well. Because where we are today, we can't deliver everything in a seamless fashion. We can't automate it. We need that human combination. And that's why I like the Be My Eyes example, because it gives us that combination of technology and people. Admittedly, that's sourcing a voluntary group of, I think it's up to 4 million people volunteer for that now. It's a massive number of people that volunteer for it. But it's that combination. When we think about customer experience, we should think about how the individual would like to get access to the service. Of course, if all the back office systems are lined up to be able to deliver all the information. But it is so important to think about, as Christopher said, the intent of what you're trying to achieve. And all too often, we get pushed towards a particular channel, which is just not always that useful. One of the things that I know as an industry in my telecom industry we talk about a lot these days is artificial intelligence. Is AI going to solve the accessibility and customer experience issue?
I think AI will help. You can't create an intelligence, at least today, that will solve all of the problems for all of the people all of the time. People are complicated, they're nuanced, and everyone has an individual set of challenges. I think where artificial intelligence can help is creating some of these bridges of the mismatch. One example is automated software recognition for the automated captions. This is a great way of using artificial intelligence to help people who can't consume media. All of a sudden this becomes available to them. What's really interesting now is we're using machine learning and artificial intelligence and computer vision to create some new ways of interacting with your computer. On Google, we've recently released a feature called camera switches, which allows the camera to act as a virtual physical switch. So if someone could make a certain kind of facial gesture, we could recognize that as a switch press. So all of a sudden, someone who has only access of their face can manipulate a computer on their own. They're not constrained. Another technology that was recently a project that we put out was called Look to Speak. Similar kind of thing. If we could recognize a person's face and we can help them communicate by allowing them to create words and sentences and communicate on their own behalf. They can interact with technology because we can let them say, "Hey Google, turn on my lights," and now they're empowered to do something for themselves instead of having to have someone come and do these things for them. So for me, artificial intelligence is a part of the process, but people have to be in the middle. People have to be engaged in the creation. They have to be engaged in the data collection. They have to be engaged in the solution. It can't be just the artificial intelligence itself.
Yes, I think certainly as an analyst, I'm looking at AI, and people say the AI market is worth whatever it is, but actually it's part of everything that we do. Obviously it's part of that smart speaker at home, it's part of the smart lighting, it's part of the office environment, it's part of the way networks are run, it's part of the way Google runs its services and its data centers. So I think one thing which we should emphasize here is that this isn't just building services to address the billion people that I described at the beginning. The channels that we all choose to use, whatever people's abilities, that we may choose different channels at different times. And I think to exemplify that, I often use the case of, when driving, my wife should not be picking up her phone and looking at it and doing things. She should be using the text-to-speech and the speech back to text to deliver those services. So we're wrapping the service and developing it so actually when channels may be temporarily cut off to people, that they can also be used. So there is a benefit to everybody if we design these things more efficiently. In fact, one of the things one of my pet hates as a vision impaired person is when I go into a website through my laptop, how cluttered the PC screen is. The browsers and the access, and as good as search may be, it's still much quicker for someone like my wife who sees very well to find the right answer, whereas I'm serially scrolling down. In fact, I tested it yesterday. I was on a website trying to get to a video, a particular telecom video. I had to tab 100 times to get to the content. And yet I know the little play button that you would see in the middle of the screen was right in the middle of the screen. So if I could have seen it, it would have been a lot quicker. But actually, in thinking about the design, if it's cleaner design, then everybody benefits. And that's why I think many people prefer to use the smartphone as an access to content, because it tends to be cleaner. In fact, I'm definitely beginning to prefer the smart speaker as access, because it's even cleaner as long as you get the words in the right order. But just to emphasize the fact that the benefit of if we design it based on including people's disabilities, then the channel for everybody becomes a lot cleaner, because we're beginning to move away from the underlying technological components of each channel and thinking about what people are trying to do with it. And if it is getting ultimately to a voice call, great. If it's sending a document out, sending it in the right format. But one thing which, and Christopher, I don't know whether you want to comment on this. I, as a vision impaired person, the service I get, say, from my doctor, from hospitals, from local government, there's a GDPR, there's a privacy issue about that they know that I'm vision impaired, because they should do by all the information about me, but they're not allowed to know, or they're not allowed to do anything on the basis of it. Is that, I guess, part of your move to Europe is to help get closer to that sort of thing as well?
The move to Europe really wasn't around GDPR. It was more about trying to understand what disability means in Europe, in the UK, in Africa, because the needs of the users are unknown until you ask the question. So I think my being here is the beginning of our wanting to become present and to become part of the conversation around a solution, not to sell anything that we think is there. I think we're just about run out of time, Chris.
No, Chris, I'm back on the podium now. No, we've got 5 more minutes. It's just that I wanted to see if there was some questions from the floor or from the virtual audience. So if we have any questions from the floor, we've got a microphone coming to you. While we're waiting for that, maybe I can ask a quick question of you, Chris.
Which Chris?
Well, I know that you're Christopher.
Oh, okay.
So I am asking Chris. You kind of touched on this a couple of times. Obviously, physical handset manufacturers, they change their models all the time, and I wonder if they could do more to think about impaired people. So, for example, you take the example of moving from a fingerprint to start to fire up your smartphone, compared to facial recognition. Do you sometimes feel like it's 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards in that respect?
It is a very good question, and when the buttonless iPhone came out, I was somewhat skeptical, but actually it worked. It does work really, really well. I think perhaps we should always try and have an option, a physical option, because some people will always prefer that physical. I must confess, facial recognition doesn't work very well with me, and I've no idea why. But it doesn't work very well, whether I'm not looking.
You're too handsome.
Thank you. Not looking in the right place. But what I think is more important is that the way that accessibility is built into the operating system actually means that moving from device to device, apart from the issues you've just pointed out, is pretty seamless.
Right.
So as long as there is no regression, as we talked about, then it does work very, very well. So when I moved from the last version to whatever I got now on the iPhone side, it was pretty seamless moving up, apart from learning to swipe up from the bottom to clear the screen and do things. So generally, I think the smartphone world has really embraced the accessibility side, but it does. There's the odd glitch, but I think the point, and I came across an issue yesterday when I upgraded to the latest operating system, and it then distorted the voices I used that I listened to. So of course I went through all the rigmarole, and it turned out I just needed to delete the voice and reinstall it. It just got a little bit corrupted during the upgrade. But right. I would say generally the physical side of accessing the device to get it started, yes, we can do more for that. But I think and certainly with your new Pixar phone, where it goes all the way down to a new chip in there, the power of the device is so great that as long as accessibility is built into the thinking, which it is now in the smartphone world, then I think we're in pretty good shape from that side. Yeah.
Well, obviously, as you alluded to, the emergence of new form factors like smart speakers, and obviously, the development of the advancement of headphone technology is making a huge difference. One final question for Christopher, actually, is I'm just wondering how how many impaired people does Google actually employ in your department? Do you actually just consult with different groups, or do you have people working with you?
I can't give numbers, but what I can say is we have dedicated ladders for people who are experts in assistive technology to help us design and test. We have engineers with disabilities, we have people in HR with disabilities, we have people in every role with every kind of disability you could imagine, from CP, blindness, deafness, cognitive impairments. There is work to be done, and there's work to be done by people who have the right skills and the right passion. And while I can't give a number, we have far more than we did in the past, and we will have more in the future because we're also getting better at supporting people with disabilities in terms of things like onboarding, career progression, and things like that. So it's something you learn to do better, and you get better over time, and it becomes this wonderful self-fulfilling prophecy.
But if I might make a comment on that, apart from obviously wanting to work in your building next to King's Cross because it's a great location, what we have seen as this issue has gone from being a corporate social responsibility issue into ESG, which is more financial, and then to broader sustainability. When people talk about diversity, obviously there is a hierarchy in diversity which we need to get around. But the fact that technologically we can address a lot of the employment, it will ease a lot more employment. We're seeing it. In fact, I just saw BT just announced today a new diversity manifesto, a broader sustainable manifesto, which includes a lot of this stuff. So I think the good news is, as sustainability as a whole gets more traction, this is being brought into mainstream as well, and the employment piece is getting a lot more attention.
Okay, and the final question, Chris, we've got a few questions online. I'm going to amalgamate them into one because they're broadly asking the same thing, which is pretty much what can people in this community do? CPaaS in particular, we've talked about a lot today, in Omnichannel. So what can people in CPaaS and other telecommunication services do to
No, sure,
and
it's exactly, it was actually my final summary point, wasn't it, on the notes we had. So I think whenever you're thinking about the services that you're designing, think about the touch points, think about it coming from the user point of view rather than the technology point of view, and think about if how people want to interact with you or with your customers, and think about what it would be like if you can't see, if you couldn't see, if you couldn't hear, if you couldn't physically touch a screen, or you couldn't speak, and it's just a great test. So think of that in your development cycle and what you're trying to achieve. Where is this accessibility issue included? Because if it's not, it really should be, because the power of the different technology components, especially in a CPaaS world where the interchangeability of components is so readily available, and digital should mean we can wrap the service around the individual. We've talked about ultimate personalization of service in the mobile industry for 25 years, probably 30 years. Yeah. And this is taking it to that absolute extreme and saying it's not just about the device, it's not just about the package that's offered to you, but it's about how you then extend that onto all the applications on the device. I would say 80% of the applications on my phone are regular applications, 20% are sort of specialist help, like Be My Eyes, as Christopher mentioned. But just at some point, always test yourself to say, are we making this accessible? When you especially introducing a new technology, is this accessible? Is this cloud-based service accessible to everybody? Can we wrap the service around the customer, and can we help, whether it's a mobile service provider or whatever application provider, can we help that service be addressable for that broader market? And how simplified can we make the interface and the actual service itself, because that's going to make everyone's lives easier.
If I could just add one point to this. Asking yourself this question is a great exercise in empathy. It'll show you where a problem is, but it won't show you what the problem is. So my sort of second step after Chris's is work with people in the community, work with people who are blind, work with people who are deaf, understand what the problems is and work with them to help solve them. Because people with disabilities are very creative and problem solvers. They know what works for them, and they can help you do that.
Great. Okay, well, it's a fascinating discussion. It's a great one to have at a conference like this, and I just remind everybody that Chris has written this report, so if you're a MEF member, you can download that, and it's great reading, so I recommend you do. So with that, I'm going to say thanks to Christopher and to Chris, and to Vali as well, and to say that we're going to have now a coffee break for 20 minutes, and we'll see you back in here after that. Thank you.